Okay, would you like to introduce yourself? Tell me a bit about yourself, and I guess what made you fall in love with history.
Yeah, so I'm Jackson Van Uden. I'm a Peterborough local. I'm a historian, a political theorist as well. So I've done a lot of work on what dictators are, tyranny and power, which of course led to me being interested in Katharine of Aragon and Henry. But I've not always been in love with history. So when I was younger, I did love history. I loved the stories, and my first book was Horrible Histories England.
Yeah.
But then, from there, I kind of fell more in love with my sports. I played rugby to a high level. I did athletics to a high level, represented the city on both of them. And that was my life for a good 10 years. It was only when, I was a very injury prone player. And it was only when I went through my second big injury, which was my ACL, where I kind of actually reevaluated. So I wasn't Jackson the sportsman anymore. I started to get more into my studies, and I actually fell back in love with history. I was like, actually, this is so much more interesting than just dates, numbers, and people. There's stories, there's overarching ideas that I want to interrogate. I want to look at even more. And that's kind of when I fell back in love with history after not being able to be who I previously saw who I was.
Why is history so great then? Why did you fall back in love with it?
It was the stories. It was the stories, and it was the people, and it was the ideas. So I'd done the history of medicine through time. Now, any history teachers who teach that module know how boring, dull, and dry that module is. Like, it's across thousands of years. I don't care about the full humours. I'm not a historian who really enjoys social history. But then I got the chance to look at political history a little bit more, and I love looking at why these big events happen, the impact of the big events, but the people driving those big events. And I love looking at the ideas of power and tyranny, not just in the 21st century, but the 20th century right back into the medieval period. And I was able to look at the ideas of power and how power was being executed through these events. So through the Tudor period, through the Reformation, through the Albigensian Crusade and the Cathars, but also through the 20th century and the big dictators. Why were they driving the change that they were driving, and how were they enacting it, were the ideas that I really, really enjoyed. Now, whenever I give a talk or I do something, my mum has to tell me to stop smiling about these horrible events, because I just find them so interesting, and they really invigorate me to want to go and look at more areas of history.
Yeah, and you're talking about dictators.
Mm-hmm.
We're obviously sitting in Peterborough Cathedral. Katharine of Aragon is here, and obviously her husband, very famous husband.
Yeah.
Tell us about Henry VIII. Where does he? I mean, he's probably the most famous king ever.
Yeah. No, he definitely is the most famous king ever. And I think it's important to note as well, he's actually Katharine of Aragon's second husband. We are too often talk about Katharine as his first wife. She is his second husband. And he is probably one of the most tyrannical figures in English history, because he does everything through his own desires, through his own will. He's not doing things for the good of the country. He's doing things because it benefits him, like through his money, through his power, through his influence. And that's very much how Henry wants to act. Now, we're sat, as you said, we're sat in Peterborough Cathedral, which is actually still here by the political knowledge and gamesmanship of John Chambers. He's someone who knew how to play these events and managed not only to save his own head, his own job, but this fantastic building. And that was simply because he understood how to play the game in Henry's tyrannical England. And we also have Katharine here, who is one of the victims of Henry's tyranny. She has to kind of play the game against Henry, or with Henry, for the first 20 years of their marriage. But after that, when she is not seen as someone who can help Henry, not seen as someone who can empower Henry further, she loses that influence. We see it from 1513 onwards, where her father has effectively stabbed Henry in the back by playing the game with him in France. And then when he sees that she's no longer able to provide a male heir, a son that survives past infancy, her life does take this quite quick decline, where she is forced to go through this humiliating trial and annulment that is effectively splashed on the front page of every newspaper in Europe. And then she is shuffled off to a series of country houses from the north of London up to Kimbolton. It is a really sad story, but also one that highlights Henry's tyranny.
So then, from that, then obviously we have Katharine of Aragon Festival here in Peterborough every January.
Yeah.
Do enough people know her story then, do you think? I mean, I presume when you give the talks, when you show people around, people are asking the questions. She's one of six. Do you know what I mean? Is she sort of widely, is that story widely known, would you say?
Yeah, I think that story is widely known. The Tudor history is one of the biggest areas in history. There's so many different podcasts and books you can go and listen to. But I think what we really benefit from here at Peterborough is a recentering of that narrative. Too much of the story of Henry's wives is told through Henry.
Yeah.
We give the Queens very little agency within that, but we also excuse Henry's actions. And we shouldn't. You know, Henry's actions are Henry's actions because he makes that decision. And I think that recentering the narrative to tell the story of the wives through their own eyes, through their own experiences, is something that we're really benefiting from here at Peterborough, because people are starting to see these women as women in their own right. They're not seeing them as accessories to Henry's rule. You know, when we're starting to talk about Catherine, we're now investigating her love of music, her interactions with the church, her patronage of education. When we're looking at Anne Boleyn, we're actually starting to see her as someone who is a very kind and caring landlord and a very generous supporter of the arts. With Jane, we're not just seeing her as Edward's mother anymore and then the mother of the Tudor dynasty. We're actually seeing her as an individual who is being found in a situation she perhaps doesn't want to be in. Anne of Cleves, you know, we're kind of reinvestigating this story that she's the ugly wife. Actually, no, she's not particularly interested in Henry herself. You know, who would want a man who looks like that at that age? Catherine Howard was now seeing her as a victim of Henry's tyranny, not someone who is, you know, stupid, silly little girl, which the traditional narrative has been. And Catherine Parr, this idea that she's a survivor is one that kind of paints her as someone who doesn't experience Henry's tyranny, when in fact she does. And she has a very traumatic marriage, and she has to save her own life several times. So I think we're really benefiting from this recentering of the narrative around the wives here in Peterborough.
Yeah, thank goodness that is the case. That, as you said, you know, Henry VIII is tyrant, one of the worst. If King John,
oh god, yeah.
But it's true though, isn't it? That we've had a few that are not great people. But we are lucky, I guess, in that regard, just reversing back a little bit, that we have this building where we can mark her life and so many other things. I mean, you work here. Tell us about this building. What makes this building special?
I think with this building, it is one of the most gorgeous buildings. And I'd go as far to say not just England and Britain, but actually in Europe. And you know, the west front is absolutely stunning. There's not a day when I come to come work here through my role at the Katharine of Aragon Festival or other roles that I don't just look at this building and think, wow, it's just absolutely stunning. And you can really see the impact of pretty much every age on this building. You can see the architectural shift from a Romanesque to Normanesque, and a different style of arches and different style of columns within the building. You can see, you know, this wooden nave ceiling, which is absolutely stunning, one of the finest examples in Europe. But then you can also see the impact of, you know, the Tudors on this building. We have the new building at the back, and you have one of the few examples of Catherine and Arthur being pictured in one of the rebuses in the frieze. But then you have the impact of the Civil War. You know, we are one of the few cathedrals in the country which are still standing from the Reformation, from the damage of that. But we've lost the Lady Chapel, we've lost most of our cloisters, we've lost Catherine's tomb. We don't have our choir screen anymore, a nave screen. So I think the great thing about this building is you can tell a story of England simply through how the different ages have impacted the building. And I mean, you can even see the effect of the fire in the early 2000s as well. It's just one of the most incredible buildings in Europe. And
do you think people recognise how lucky they are to have this? Because I was in Germany a couple of years ago. It was in Cologne. And you know what I'm going to say. And you come out the train station, you're like, oh my goodness. And that is an incredible building. You know, I've been to Barcelona and others with amazing cathedrals. But then when you think back, actually, we do have this at home. That is, I come from Coventry.
Yeah.
We've got two, obviously.
Lucky bugger.
I know. But yeah, they're no better than this one.
Yeah, and I do not mean this in any disparaging way to my city, because I love Peterborough. But there are very few occasions where I go anywhere in the world and I do look up and think, it's not quite Peterborough. Because this cathedral is just absolutely stunning. It is, I mean, I went to uni in Chichester. I love Chichester Cathedral, but it's just not a scratch on this building. And I think we do take it for granted because it does dominate our skyline. We do see it every day. And I think we've taken it for granted for centuries. I mean, there's a quote from the 1800s. There is a travel writer who was going to look at all the cathedrals in England, and he says Peterborough is the best of the second-rate cathedrals. Now, he's not talking second-rate as in, you know, a crappy one.
Yeah, let's not.
But he's talking about it in terms of the new foundation ones. And you know, if you look at us with the new foundation cathedrals, you know, there's not a scratch. And we were one of the biggest, richest monasteries prior to the Reformation. And I think, you know, Peterborough really holds its own among the first-rate cathedrals when you compare us. I mean, there's not a lot that you can kind of say is just as good.
So with that in mind then, just still talking about the cathedral, tell us something about this cathedral that visitors might not know. Just one fact or something that people might not know that makes it so distinctive, unusual.
For me, it's actually I love the Tudor New Building. Actually, the fan vault ceiling is one of the earliest examples within the period. We can date the new building to about 1501 because, as I said earlier, that little depiction of Katharine and Arthur in one of the, I always forget if it's a rebus or a frieze. But
I won't be picking you up on that.
But it's one of the few depictions, and actually across those same rebuses and friezes, you can see the different icons of some of the most powerful families. You have the portcullis, which we now see in the Treasury, and a lot of government icons. But it was one of the icons of Margaret Beaufort. So you can see that Peterborough Cathedral actually is benefiting from the patronage of some of the most powerful people in England within the 16th century. And it doesn't fit within this narrative that we usually have at Peterborough, that we're a small provincial underdog town that has kind of grown through government grants. Well, actually, you know, we were one of the most powerful monasteries in the country, one of the richest monasteries in the country, and we had such fantastic connections to power. We had the Beaufort family Margaret Beaufort being invested in this cathedral because she lived up at Collie Weston. We've got the depictions of Katharine and Arthur. We also had, you know, various kings stay here when they were on their way north. We had Katharine of Aragon buried here. We had Mary Queen of Scots buried here. So we have been one of the most important seats of power outside of the archbishoprics and London.
And in that regard, so just going back to the festival itself, which obviously happened in January.
Yeah.
That's really grown, hasn't it? It's become a really sort of prominent part of the events calendar in the city. Very well attended, and
it's amazing. Yeah, it's amazing. So I'm one of the directors alongside Alex, who's in the education team, and Tony, who's in the education team. And one big thing that I really want to push with this festival is I came when I was 6, 7 as a kid. I also made my mum come down to this festival and get a signed book from Alison Weir, and I always talk to Alison about it. And it's part of my way of giving back to this city. You know, when I was growing up, I've lived in Peterborough for 20 years now, and when I was growing up, there was nothing coming here. History and culture didn't really come to Peterborough, and that's something that I really want to give the next generation and the current people living in the city the opportunity to engage with these people and these historians, because it's an opportunity I didn't really have. And I think giving back to the city and giving these opportunities will kind of undercut the narrative that no one cares about Peterborough and nothing's going on here. well, actually, there is stuff
Yes.
going on here, and you can get people like Alison Weir to come up here, Estelle Perron, Gareth Russell. Well, that they're giving us the opportunity to engage and interact with things that we haven't had for the last 20 years. And that's something I find really important. And, in 20 years' time, I'm one of the directors of the festival and the talks curator. I would ideally love, we've got some kids here today. We've had a massive schools part of the festival. I would absolutely love to hand my role on to someone who came to the festival when they were 6 or 7 and just say, hey, look, this is the
Succession
circle.
of,
Exactly. Because this is an important city and we don't make enough of how many opportunities there are. We don't make enough of the people who have come from here. Outside of just me as a historian, we've got James Rogers, who's one of the foremost leaders in precision warfare, the history of precision warfare. And he's working over in the US. He works at NATO. He works at the UN. He's from Peterborough. He grew up in Barnock. Helen Carr, one of the foremost historians in the medieval period, she's just written a fantastic book, Sceptred Isle, that came out last year. I think it's come out of paperback now. She was born in Peterborough. And we don't make enough.
People don't realise that they're
exactly
people like that. From here.
Yeah, so we've got some of the foremost thought leaders in the historical community who are born in Peterborough, but we don't make enough of it.
No.
And that's what I really want to do, is show Peterborough we've got something to offer. We've got opportunities. We need to make the most of them.
Well, that neatly segues into the question I'm going to ask now about the City of Culture bid.
Mm-hmm.
I presume from what you said there that you are firmly behind that.
Yes. Yeah.
Why are you? You've kind of given a bit of an explanation there. Obviously, we have the cathedral, but there's lots of other things as well. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah. There's so many other things. I'm behind it because, I started getting involved with Peterborough history because I was going to write an article criticising the fact that we don't make enough of our history.
Okay.
And I actually didn't think that was a productive. When I sat there and about to plan it, I was like, actually, this is not productive.
No, negative, maybe.
Yeah, negative. Yeah. I'm just doing what everyone else does. I'm continuously criticising what the city's not done for the last 20, 30, 40 years. And actually, something that would be more productive would be to get involved.
Yeah.
And I think the City of Culture bid is an important thing for the city to do and to get behind, because we need to get rid of this plucky, this underdog, the city of unachievement kind of tag that we've given ourselves, because it's simply not true. And I'm sick, and I always tell my historian friends this, I'm sick and tired of having to say, when people say, where are you from? I'm from Peterborough. Where's Peterborough? It's North Cambridge. Okay, where's
we go.
Yeah, it's the worst place. It's the worst place to live in the UK. It's simply not. Like, there are places which are objectively worse than Peterborough. I've seen them.
Yeah.
There are places that are objectively worse, and I'm just sick and tired of this tag that we give ourselves, because there is so much more to offer. We had a castle on the northeastern side of the cathedral. We don't make enough of that. We have Flag Fen and Must Farm. We don't make enough of that. We have Thorpe Hall, which very sadly is up for sale. We don't know what's happening with Thorpe Hall. But then again, that hall was made with bits of the Lady Chapel and cloisters. And Oliver St John beat Cromwell for the stone. We've got Holywell Ponds in Longthorpe. We've got some gorgeous churches, stone medieval churches across the city. I know it's in Stamford, but technically it's in Peterborough. We've got Burley House. There is so much different historical elements of this city, which we just don't cry about. I'm looking out the front doors of this cathedral, and I can see the Guildhall right now. There are items and places in the city that we don't talk about. And I think if we start to recognise ourselves as a location of culture, a location of history, and a location that has had an impact on English and British history, then we can start to make sure that the kids in this city know that they absolutely know that they can achieve, and they can go out and do whatever they want to do. Because if we keep taking this city of, it's a crappy city, we don't achieve anything, that narrative will continue to go through to the kids of the city, and they will not believe that they can achieve. They will not believe that they can do something that's beneficial and good. Even if we look further outside of history, Simi Pam, she was a couple of years ahead of me at Longthorpe Primary. Simi Pam is one of the foremost props in the Women's Premier League in rugby. She plays for Bristol. Does Peterborough make enough for Simi?
Nope.
Absolutely not. There were so many other people. her sister Lizzie was one of the greatest. She was a great tennis player. We don't really make enough of that.
That's a sporting dynasty in that family right there, right?
Exactly. So and they're just two examples of people I went to primary school with. There are so many people from the city who have done well, but we don't make enough of them, and I'm sick and tired of hearing this disappointment narrative in the city because it's simply not true.
Yeah, and it's kind of like you mentioned Cambridge, you mentioned Stanford, and there's also London, obviously, we're 45 minutes, and we're sort of in the middle of it, but never really, you're always, Cambridge is so lovely and Stanford, and we're never the ones that are brought up as somewhere, aspirational to like, to love, to celebrate.
I think it's a crying shame. I mean, Stanford was one of the 5 boroughs in the Anglo-Saxon period. Cambridge has been one of the most important cities in England and UK for very, very long, hundreds,
of course,
maybe a millennia. But we don't often think the fact that if you wanted to get to Stanford and you wanted to get to 5 boroughs, you needed to be in Peterborough. If you were travelling north from Cambridge, you needed to come to Peterborough. And yes, we benefited enormously from Lord Burleigh saying, I don't want the railway going through Stanford, and we have benefited from that. But again, it's led to this perpetual cycle of us just feeling like this through town when we're really not. We've got so much more to offer.
So you mentioned a few of them already. Some of the other buildings that we have in Peterborough that people might walk past every single day that have got incredible backstories. Tell us a few about that. You've mentioned some already. Give us another flavour of a few others.
Yeah, so down Priestgate, we've got one of the few examples of, we've got one of our, it used to be Ask Battalion, I think it's now a set of flats. It's one of the few medieval buildings in the city. It's got Collie Western slate, which is a very rare type of roofing in this area. We also have... Oh, you put me on the spot now, John. I mean, the Lido is one of the most important buildings.
Yeah, 90 years old.
Yeah, it's a gorgeous building. We've got some of the actual cathedral buildings in the back. We've got the chapter house. We've got the almshouses. Important buildings to this city, and yet we don't make enough of them. We don't talk about them. We've also got further afield. We've got the Milton estate. One of the that's a big important estate, and even if you go through I forget what the little passage is called, the one next to Cozy Club and Middleton's, if you look up, you've got some of the coats of arms of some of the most important people in this city from Peterborough's history. There was an Earl of Peterborough in the Stuart period as well. There is so much here that we just don't think about and consider, and I get that's part of living in Peterborough. But when people actually
come... It doesn't need to be that way.
It doesn't need to be that way. And when people actually come to Peterborough as tourists to see our history, and Spanish people come in their droves throughout the year, we don't do enough about it.
No. Okay. Well, let's hope that the City of Culture bid can help with that. And also that people can be more positive themselves. I mean, we going to your other passion, which is politics. Obviously, we live in a time of political tension, I would say. Let's put it that way. That's a very euphemistic way of saying it, with everything that's going on. How do you assess the situation in the UK, in Peterborough at the moment, politically? Are we happy as a nation? Are we content? Do we know which direction we want to go in?
I think it is. It's very difficult to come away from 14 years of one particular, regardless of what it is. It's very difficult to come away and undo 14 years of something. And we found the same in the early 2000s. It's very difficult to look forward after 14 years of a political type
spell.
And I think there's a lot of going on, but I also think there is a very loud minority who demonstrate quite dangerous views and quite divisive and polarizing views. And I think they're particularly damaging to how we think and see ourselves as a society. The idea of someone being English went 1,000 years ago. We are a nation of we are a nation.
Scandinavia, bits of Germany, bits of Well, India now,
Yeah,
Pakistan.
exactly.
Yeah,
We are a nation of migration.
Yeah.
And we are a nation that has consistently been a melting pot. And I think when divisive, polarizing ideologies spread across the world, they will inevitably be taken up by a group of people who feel that they've been isolated and left behind. And I think something needs to be done about that. But I think at the moment we're sitting within a polarizing period because globalization has left certain people behind, and something needs to be done about that. But the answer has never been, and will never be authoritarianization, and it will never be authoritarianism. Authoritarian rhetoric coming out of the West in America, authoritarian rhetoric coming out of Europe, coming out of Southeast Asia, is not the answer to division, because ultimately it will lead to death, destruction, and further polarization, and that's not what we need. Now, the answer, I don't know what the answer is. I'll never know what the answer is, but I know in this city, there are people who are seeking to unify. There are parties which are seeking to unify, and there are events which are seeking to unify, and we need to make more of that, because we cannot let division again plague this city. And when people who are spewing authoritarian type policies come to this city, well, they're just making things worse. And they need to actually turn up to Parliament, do their job, instead of just spewing division and hate across this city and across this country.
It's very difficult being a politician in the 21st century, isn't it?
Yes.
Would you say?
Yeah.
I mean,
thank God I'm not one.
No. I mean, it's interesting what you said earlier on about Henry VIII and Katharine of Aragon, and what would it have been like then in terms of like communication? Because obviously now mobile phones and things, we're constantly bombarded on social media and things. The difference now and the difference, it must have been enormous.
So people are people, and people have always been people. Communication obviously would have been letters and quiet conversations,
Word
privy
of mouth,
council
yeah.
chats and so on, and there would have been a huge amount of rumour. And to be honest, social media hasn't changed that. It's just changed how that rumour spreads. The amount of rumours that spread on X and Instagram about what's happening is huge. But that democratisation of communication has made us more aware. But then again, primary sources in the 16th century state that Henry was a tyrant. So it's not too different. It's just that he has a state and apparatus that he can use to that end. But ever since then, there have been checks and balances imposed on that type of power. So to get to this state where the franchise is wider, you can vote, I can vote.
Yes.
400 years ago, 300 years ago, we wouldn't have been able to vote. So I think people are people. Communication has enabled that to kind of rumours to spread a little bit further, and division to be sowed a little bit easier. But with that has come the fact that we can check tyrannical power a little bit better than they did in the 16th century.
Good. And I guess just going back to what you said a minute ago, what history is quite useful. I mean, you might be able to expand on this more. If you look at what's happened in the past, we might be able to predict and guess what could happen in the future, maybe. So where do you see the direction, maybe in Peterborough and nationally and internationally, maybe, in terms of the direction of travel? There we go. I'll throw it open to you.
People hate asking this question because I never give a positive answer.
Oh, here we go. You seem like a positive person.
Yeah, I am a positive person.
But that one's it. Yeah, but it's a tricky one, isn't it?
So we've gone through 19 years of Freedom House says we've gone through 19 consecutive years of democratic erosion. And I don't like the phrase history repeats, but history certainly rhymes. And we've gone through 19 years of democratic erosion. There are more authoritarian regimes now than there were 20, 30 years ago. This end of history, I know Fukuyama didn't really say it like the way that we say it, but end of history isn't the end of history. Liberal democracy has not come out as a hegemonic winner. I think there are a couple of rough years ahead. There is still hot conflict in Europe.
Yeah.
There is still hot conflict in Asia. There is still set to be some form of political conflict in the Americas. And, this is a point where things can get worse. I personally do not think there's going to be a world war, or if we are in a world war, we're currently in it, because conflict doesn't look like what it looked in the 20th century.
Yeah.
I think, things are only going to get worse until all polarization and authoritarian regimes are only going to continue to proliferate, until the great authoritarians of the 21st century have died or have gone. So, Xi Jinping, he's in his 70s. Realistically, you've got another 20 years, 10, 20 years of Xi Jinping. Putin, you've realistically got another 5, 15 years of Vladimir Putin.
Yeah, I mean,
Lukashenko stepping down in Belarus, but looks to be replaced by his son. Viktor Orban is still in power in Hungary. You've got Modi in India. So you have these different authoritarian leaders whose power looks to be entrenched, and they've got another 5, 10, 15, 20 years until that power collapses. So I think we're in a very similar situation to what we were in the 90s, where or 90s and 80s, where you're looking at all these authoritarian leaders, and they're only going to become more authoritarian until they pass away. And I think a lot of their legitimacy stems from who they are as a person, not their economic performance. It's ideology and them themselves. So when they go, I think then we can look towards the future, and we can look towards making sure everyone's lives are getting better. I mean, what's happening in the protests in Iran and Afghanistan actually, I think, are a positive, because they're showing that the people in that region are fed up of theocratic authoritarianism. They're fed up of that style of government, and that will only impact everyone else as it spreads.
Let us end on a positive note. Obviously, you run a podcast yourself, very busy on social media as well. Where can people find you? Tell us about some of the people you've spoken to recently as well, and some of the interesting stories.
Yeah, so I'm a historical content creator as well as a podcaster. So I do presenting videos when I'm not busy with my PhD on at History of Jackson on Instagram and TikTok. But then it's called History of Jackson Podcast, so you can find that on any podcast player. So recently, this week, spoke to Debbie Kilroy about members behaving badly. So it's very apt and timely. Badly behaved members of Parliament for the last few hundred years. It ends in 1945, I'm pretty sure. Okay. But next week, I've got Frank Decotta talking about the rise of communism in China. So I make sure there's a huge spread of topics, right from prehistory to the history of today. And that you can find that on any podcast player, History of Jackson Podcast, and at History of Jackson on Instagram and TikTok.
Brilliant. Thank you very much.
No, thank you very much.
Cheers.